things that made Tim Cook Tim Cook. Saving Apple. When Tim Cook joined Apple in 1998, Apple was in a very dire situation. This period of Apple's history was so bad for Apple, it could have meant bankruptcy and thus the end of the company. There's no doubt that Apple's iMac was back then among the best PCs money could buy, but that wasn't the problem.
Apple sales in 1995 were 11.1 billion. In 96 they were 9.5 billion, and in this year they'll be, 7 billion plus or minus a little bit. That's the problem.
You see, only 4 years earlier in 1994, Apple has been an overachiever in the tech world, being the second biggest company in the computer industry, only beat by the number one, IBM. However, everything changed for Apple on the fateful day of the 24th of August 1995. Windows 95 arrived, and with that came the possibility for IBM clones from Dell, Compaq, and Gateway to be user-friendly for non-tech geeks. Even though 95 was a rip-off of the Mac OS operating system, consumers were in search of a cheap and user-friendly OS they could install on their PCs, so the fact that Windows wasn't as polished as Mac OS didn't disturb them too much. And hey, I don't blame them. That's the whole point of a market economy. That demands meet supply and find a winner. And Windows was filling the demand for a user-friendly OS that doesn't cost a lot of money. And as Picasso said, good artists copy, great artists steal. So, good job, Bill. Anyways, this period of Apple's history also marks the time when Jobs came back from his 12-year hiatus after he had been fired from Apple. The then CEO, Dr. Gilbert Amelio, brought Steve back.
Steve Jobs has been around since the very first Macintosh. So please join with me now and welcome from Apple Computer, Steve Jobs.
Knowing that Jobs' wisdom would have been required to turn the company around. And Steve's first course of action was repealing lots of the stuff Emilio and his predecessors did the last couple of years, most notably cutting back Apple's product line. In response to the huge influx of cheap Windows systems, Apple had 40 different models on the market. Jobs directly recognized that this is unnecessarily causing customers confusion in telling the difference between 40 different types of models, and he was right. Shrinking the size of Apple's product line proved itself to be exactly the right move to make in that situation. However, it wasn't enough to save the company, and that's where Cook comes into the picture. Jobs knew that most of the problems that tortured Apple stemmed from the operations department. Yup, you heard right, the department responsible for manufacturing. So the creative genius and visionary, Jobs, brought the business and management genius Tim Cook on board. Cook agreed to join the crew, even though almost any business guy would have advised against that move at that time. Cook admitted, any purely rational consideration of cost and benefits lined up in Compaq's favor, and the people who knew me best advised me to stay at Compaq. Cook revealed during his 2010 commencement address at Auburn University,
one CEO I consulted felt so strongly about it, he told me I would be a fool to leave Compaq for Apple.
However, Cook was really intrigued to work for Jobs as a person he really admired and still admires to this day. I'd always thought that following the herd was not a good thing, that it was a terrible thing to do, Cook recounted. The way that he talked, and the way the chemistry was in the room, it was just he and I could tell I can work with him. I looked at the problems Apple had, and I thought, I can make a contribution here. So all of a sudden I thought, I'm doing it. I was young at the time, it didn't make sense, and yet my gut said go for it, and I listened to my gut. Interestingly, Cook appeared to be so good at operations that his impact started before he was even hired. It was obvious from the outset that Cook was exceptional at operations, even before he was hired, said Greg Joswiak, the 30-year Apple veteran. I remember when Steve was interviewing Tim because he was coming back and telling us amazing things about operations that he was clearly learning from his interviews with Tim. Joswiak told Leander Carney, author of Tim Cook's biography, in an interview at Apple Park. And so he was having literally an impact on us and some of the operational thinking that happened before he was hired. It was March 1998 when Tim Cook became COO at Apple. Only 37 years old at the time, he already achieved an impressive base salary of $400,000 and a $500,000 signing bonus. And directly after arriving at Apple, Cook already hired a top-of-the-art operations team to aid him in his quest to save Apple. Now, as you can remember, just-in-time manufacturing was the secret recipe to IBM's success, which Cook learned and perfected at his time there. And now was the time for Apple to apply some of IBM's and Dell's secret sauce to its own production game. Cook was a hard worker who takes all his jobs seriously, and that revealed itself pretty quickly. Just after 7 months of being at Apple, Cook reduced the company's inventory from a 30 days worth to just a 6 days worth of product. The benefits showed themselves in terms of numbers pretty quickly. From $400 million worth of unsold iMacs, the number went down to $78 million worth. The same focus Jobs laid on reducing the number of models in Apple's product line, Cook laid on reducing the number of suppliers Apple worked with. Cook followed a genius plan at that time. Convinced the remaining suppliers to build their plants close to Apple's factories, and he achieved that perfectly. Needless to say, that made the JIT manufacturing process a whole lot easier. Another part of Cook's strategy to save Apple was found in outsourcing. Whenever it was possible to outsource production labor, Cook outsourced it. This was really important as well to bolster Apple's JIT manufacturing efforts, because they no longer had to pay for big warehouses with unsold PCs and PC parts. This quote from Tim should make his inventory philosophy pretty clear. You want to manage it like you're in the dairy business, he said. If it gets past its freshness date, you have a problem. To get a handle on production, Cook invested in the ERP system software for resource planning. This was crucial in feeding Cook's state-of-the-art operations team with the right kind of information they needed to keep improving the manufacturing process. By 1999, Apple beat Dell in terms of JIT manufacturing, even though Dell was considered the industry's gold standard at that time. Apple finally made its return to profitability, and without Tim and his team's help, that would have never been possible. Cook's genius of operation is also what is responsible for Apple's ginormous growth in the following years. This genius still can be felt to this day if one takes a closer look at Apple. For example, the fact that Apple manages it to quietly ship its products to Apple stores worldwide before any Apple event in order to release them during or shortly after the Apple event proves that only an operations genius such as Tim could manage something like that. Doing all of that internationally while keeping a veil of secrecy around Apple's products is truly the craft of a genius. The changes Cook made revealed themselves to be successful pretty soon. In 1997, Apple reported a net loss of just over $1 billion, and after 1 year of Tim Cook's magic, in the end of '98, Apple was already seeing profits again. Apple made a profit of $106 million that quarter and $309 million for the fiscal year. Apple grew faster than the industry this quarter for the first time in nearly 5 years, Jobs boasted. We already heard about Cook moving Apple to JIT manufacturing and moving suppliers close to factories through lucrative deals. But there's still an important aspect of Cook's strategy left, and it's this: human labor in assembly. You might ask yourself, why? Human labor would be a step to success and not a hindrance in terms of assembling goods. Wouldn't it be that much better and much more cost effective to assemble all of Apple's products with robots and not by hand? As it turns out, especially for a company like Apple that produces lots of different types of electronic gadgets, flexibility and not automation is the key word here. Jobs made his own encounter with the automation problem in the 80s when he built a factory for assembling the first Macintosh. Every single task that needed to be made in order to make the Macintosh ready for shipment has been done by robots. The result? The demand for the Macintosh was way below the capacity of the factory. And since the robots couldn't be reconfigured to assemble any other tech products, it had to close down. And this is where Cook and his outsourcing strategy come in. Through making deals with companies like Foxconn that were more similar to cities than to factories, since the entire staff lived there, Cook had brought a workforce on board that could be available 24/7, always ready to adjust to new plans for assembly. This proved itself to be especially helpful when Apple pulled one of their infamous last-minute changes. For example, when they ordered the first iMacs to be built, Apple's design engineers came up late at night with the idea of a new button on the iMac. The button was untested, so releasing this version of the iMac without prior testing could have led to a massive fiasco, so a dozen of Foxconn workers were woken up in the middle of the night just to test out the new design concept. That's very easy for Foxconn to do, said former product design engineer Gautam Bakshi. At other factories, they might want to design a machine that constantly pushes it. But it's no problem asking a minimum wage worker to push the button all night long. That happens routinely. That's not even a stretch example of what they'll do. In September 1999, Apple has hit a new all-time high with its stock price, with a record price of $73 a share, up from its previous record set in 1991 of $68 per share. Apple was back, and it was all thanks to Cook. Tim Cook versus the U.S. government, defending the people's privacy rights. Apple has 6 core values. One of them is privacy and security, and in 2012 with iOS 6, the first iPhone and iPad update entirely developed under Cook as the CEO, began the first major expansion of privacy features on Apple's devices. Following that, there's been a flood of many privacy adjustments in order to keep customers' data safe from corporations, criminals, and last but not least, the government. As anyone can imagine, that last group of people weren't all too happy with that and soon tried to enforce their grip on the data of Apple's users. In 2013, Apple released a transparency report which documented requests from the government to disclose user information, and the reasons why Apple wouldn't do so, and why Apple in fact can do so. Consumer privacy is a consideration from the earliest stages of design for all our products and services, Apple continued. We work hard to deliver the most secure hardware and software in the world. Apple also noted that its business does not depend on collecting personal data, unlike other Silicon Valley giants such as Facebook and Google. We have no interest in amassing personal information about our customers. And in a speech at the EPIC Champions for Freedom Award dinner, Tim Cook said, "Like many of you, we at Apple reject the idea that our customers should have to make trade-offs between privacy and security," Cook began. "We can and we must provide both in equal measure. We believe that people have a fundamental right to privacy. The American people demand it, the Constitution demands it, morality demands it. Removing encryption tools from our products altogether, as some in Washington would like us to do, would only hurt law-abiding citizens who rely on us to protect their data," he stressed. Now, we have a deep respect for law enforcement, but on this issue we disagree. So let me be crystal clear. Weakening encryption or taking it away harms good people that are using it for the right reasons. And ultimately, I believe it has a chilling effect on our First Amendment rights and undermines our country's founding principles. And in 2016, Tim Cook's hard stances on privacy came to the test as he came head-to-head with the U.S. government. On February 16, 2016, Tim Cook called for an emergency boardroom meeting. The reason? A writ from the U.S. government ordering Apple to develop a software that would allow them to unlock any iPhone used while keeping its data intact. Still, Apple held to its principles and denied execution of this order, because they know that it could seriously hurt the privacy and security of millions of their users worldwide. But why, out of all the times, would the FBI send out their order right now? Shortly before the FBI sent out their order to Apple, the San Bernardino shooting happened, in which a terrorist killed 14 people. The FBI wanted to crack the iPhone of a suspect, but couldn't. These dire circumstances would feed the FBI the perfect situation they've needed to gain public support, which made the whole situation even tougher for Cook and Apple. Of course, Apple wouldn't want to be seen as siding with a potential terrorist. Simultaneously, Apple tried to protect the civil liberties of the people. The whole future of Apple as a company was hanging on a small thread at that moment. In the end, the FBI had to give up and drop the lawsuit against Apple. Cook won, and the importance of that event can't be understated. It was a big win for civil liberties, not only in the US, but the entire West, and maybe even the world. The only thing that Cook regretted a bit was that it didn't come to a trial, because it would have been a great exemplary trial. Final thoughts. There aren't a lot of business people in this world that you'd compare to Cook. The story of Tim Cook's success shows us that proper management and delegation, as well as discipline and enormous attention to detail, are the most important parts of any company's success. And when Jobs got Cook on board, he knew that. Cook knew everything that was going on at Apple, as exemplified by this anecdote. A manager from Apple's hardware group was once shocked to listen in on a meeting headed up by Cook. At one point, an underling came up with a figure Cook deemed was incorrect. "That number is wrong," Cook said. "Get out of here." Hard work, attention to detail, and proper leadership always pay off. Make those attributes yours and you'll rise to the top just as Cook did. Always remember, the greatest creative minds and visionaries are nothing without proper execution and leadership.